Imagine you are late on rent, your credit card minimum payment is due tomorrow, and your card just started making a noise that sounds expensive. Your heart rate increases, your vision narrows, and every decision you make for the rest of the day feels urgent and heavy. Now imagine that same leak from the perspective of someone with a comfortable savings buffer. The rent is on autopay, the credit card is set to pay in full, and the car noise is an inconvenience to be scheduled for next week. The difference between these two experiences is not just a difference in bank account balances. It is a difference in cognitive capacity, in decision quality, in patience, and in the ability to plan for the future. Behavioral economists and psychologists have spent the past 2 decades studying this phenomenon, and what they have found is unsettling. Scarcity, the subjective experience of having less than you need, does not just make you feel stressed. It actually reduces your mental bandwidth, lowers your effective IQ, and causes you to make financial decisions that make your scarcity worse. Being broke is expensive. And the reason is not just high interest rates or late fees, though those matter. The deeper reason is that scarcity captures your brain and leaves no room for the kind of thinking that would get you out of. To understand the scarcity trap, you have to first understand a concept called tunneling. When you face a pressing shortage, whether of money, time, or even social connection, your mind naturally focuses intensely on that scarce resource. This focus is not a character flaw. It is an evolutionary adaptation. If you are hungry, your brain should focus on finding food. If you are threatened, your brain should focus on escape. The problem is that modern financial scarcity is not a short-term emergency that resolves itself after a sprint. Financial scarcity often lasts for months or years, and during that time, your brain remains in tunnel vision mode. You focus on paying the next bill, making the next minimum payment, avoiding the next late fee. And while you are focused on that immediate problem, you neglect everything else: the training course that would raise your income, the preventive maintenance that would avoid a larger expense, the comparison shopping that would lower your bills, the networking that would lead to a better job. Tunneling makes you effective at solving the immediate problem, but it makes you blind to the structural problems that created the scarcity in the first place. The most rigorous evidence for this comes from a series of studies conducted by economists Sendhil Mullainathan and Eldar Shaffer, summarized in their book Scarcity: Why Having Too Little Means So Much. In one study, they gave shoppers in a New Jersey mall a series of fluid reasoning tests, the kind that measure cognitive capacity and executive control. Before the test, they asked the shoppers a simple question: imagine your car needs a repair that costs $300. Can you pay for it today, or would you have to struggle? The shoppers who said they could easily pay for the repair performed well on the tests regardless of their income level. But the shoppers who said they would struggle to pay the $300 performed significantly worse on the same tests, scoring as if they had lost about 13 IQ points. Then the researchers ran a second version of the experiment. They asked a different group of shoppers the same question, but this time the hypothetical repair cost was $3,000 instead of $300. For the wealthy shoppers who could easily pay $3,000, their test scores remained high. For the poorer shoppers, the $3,000 question caused their scores to drop even more dramatically, as if they had lost 20 IQ points. The mere thought of a financial problem they could not easily solve was enough to reduce their cognitive capacity in real time. This is not because poor people are less intelligent. It is because scarcity captures attention. When you have less money, your brain is constantly, often unconsciously, monitoring your financial state. That monitoring uses up working memory, the same working memory you need to solve problems, plan for the future, and resist impulsive choices. The poor shopper in the mall who heard the $300 repair question did not just hear a hypothetical. They felt the actual stress of their own financial situation, and that stress consumed cognitive resources that would otherwise have been available for the reasoning test. The wealthy shopper, by contrast, heard a hypothetical that posed no real threat, so their cognitive resources remained fully available. The implication is staggering. Financial scarcity does not just make you poorer in dollars. It makes you poorer in mental bandwidth, which then leads to decisions that cost more dollars, which deepens the scarcity, which further reduces bandwidth. That is the scarcity trap. Let us look at a concrete example of how this plays out in everyday financial life. Consider the decision of whether to pay a bill late. A person with ample liquidity pays all bills on time, automatically, without thinking. They never incur late fees because they have set up autopay or because they simply write the check when it arrives. A person in scarcity, however, faces a constant trade-off. They have exactly enough money for rent, but the electricity bill is also due, and the credit card minimum payment is tomorrow, and their child needs shoes. They have to choose which bill to pay late, which fee to incur, which creditor to anger. That decision itself consumes mental energy. They spend hours calculating, worrying, juggling. Eventually, they pay the rent on time and let the credit card payment slide. The late fee is $39. That might not sound like much, but for someone living close to the edge, $39 is a meaningful fraction of their discretionary spending. To cover that $39, they might have to skip a week of bus fare, borrow from a friend, or put less food on the table. And the late payment itself triggers other consequences: a higher interest rate on the credit card, a hit to their credit score that will make future borrowing more expensive, and the emotional toll of knowing they are falling behind. Now consider the same decision from the perspective of cognitive bandwidth. The person in scarcity who just spent hours juggling bills has less mental energy left for their job, their parenting, their sleep, their health. They might make a mistake at work that costs them a promotion. They might snap at their child in a way that damages their relationship. They might skip a meal and then have low blood sugar, which impairs their judgment further. The $39 late fee is just the visible cost. The invisible costs, lost opportunities, damaged relationships, impaired health, are far larger and compound over time. The rich person never incurs the late fee, never loses the cognitive bandwidth, and never suffers the invisible costs. The scarcity trap also affects borrowing behavior. When you are under financial pressure, your time horizon shortens dramatically. You care much more about getting through today than about saving money over the next year. This is why payday lenders thrive. A person who needs $200 to avoid eviction tomorrow will accept a loan that costs $400 to repay in 2 weeks, because the alternative, losing their apartment, is catastrophic. From the outside, that looks like a terrible decision. $400 for a $200 loan is a 1,000% annual interest rate. But from the inside, from inside the tunnel of scarcity, the decision is rational given the constraints. The problem is that taking that loan deepens the scarcity. Next month, the borrower has to repay $400, which leaves even less for rent and bills, which leads to another loan, and the cycle spirals. The borrower is not stupid. The borrower is trapped, and the trap is not just poverty. The trap is the combination of poverty and the cognitive effects of poverty. The same logic applies to everyday purchases. Consider buying a pair of work boots. A person with money buys a $150 pair of boots that lasts 5 years. A person in scarcity buys a $30 pair of boots that lasts 6 months. Over 5 years, the person in scarcity spends $300 on boots, twice as much as the wealthy person, and they spend it in small, painful increments while wearing uncomfortable boots that may cause foot problems. The wealthy person pays more upfront but less over time. This is the classic Sam Vim's theory of economic injustice, named after a character in Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels, and it is not just a metaphor. It is a mathematical reality for thousands of everyday products, from tires to refrigerators to washing machines. Being poor means buying cheaper, lower quality items that break sooner and cost more to replace. Being poor means not having the cash flow to buy in bulk, so you buy small, expensive packages at convenience stores instead of large, cheap packages at wholesale clubs. Being poor means not having the credit score to get a low-interest loan, so you pay higher rates. Being poor means not having the time to comparison shop, because you are working 2 jobs and caring for children, so you overpay at the nearest store. Every one of these disadvantages is magnified by the cognitive load of scarcity, which makes it harder to plan purchases, harder to resist impulse buys, and harder to learn from past mistakes. The historical parallel here is instructive. In the early 20th century, coal mining towns in Appalachia operated company stores where miners were paid in scrip, not cash. The scrip was only usable at the company store, where prices were inflated. Miners often ended each month owing more to the store than they had earned. They were trapped in a cycle of debt that was deliberately designed by the mine owners. Today, we do not have company stores in the same way, but we have a similar dynamic in low-income neighborhoods. Check cashing stores charge fees to convert paychecks into cash. Pawn shops lend against belongings at high rates. Rent-to-own stores sell furniture and appliances at effective interest rates of 100% or more. These businesses are not accidents. They are adaptations to the scarcity trap. They exist because people in scarcity have immediate needs and no cash, and they are willing to pay enormous premiums to solve those immediate needs. The businesses profit from the scarcity trap. They do not create it, but they deepen it. The research on scarcity also reveals something counterintuitive about how to escape the trap. Traditional financial education programs, the kind that teach budgeting, saving, and investing, have surprisingly low success rates for people in severe financial scarcity. The reason is not that the information is wrong. The reason is that scarcity consumes so much bandwidth that people cannot apply what they learn. Teaching a person in scarcity about compound interest is like teaching a drowning person about swimming strokes. The information is relevant, but the immediate need for air makes it impossible to process. What works instead are structural interventions that reduce the cognitive load of poverty. Automatic enrollment in savings plans, default options that opt people into beneficial programs, simplified financial aid forms, reminders for bill payments, and small cash buffers that reduce the urgency of every decision. These interventions work because they bypass the bandwidth problem. They do not require the scarce person to be a perfect rational actor. They just make the better choice the easier choice. The most powerful example of this is the role of a small cash buffer. Recall the $300 car repair experiment. When people had a buffer large enough to absorb a $300 shock, their cognitive performance remained normal. When they did not, their performance dropped dramatically. This suggests that the goal for someone in scarcity is not to become rich. The goal is to cross a threshold where unexpected expenses no longer trigger a tunneling response. For most people, that threshold is somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000. Crossing that threshold does not solve all financial problems, but it does something arguably more important. It restores cognitive bandwidth. It allows the person to think clearly about next month instead of only about tomorrow. It allows them to compare prices, to research purchases, to take a training course, to apply for a better job. The small buffer is not a solution in itself. It is the enabler of solutions. This is why programs that give small cash grants to people in poverty often produce large long-term effects. A $500 unconditional cash transfer to a family in scarcity does not just buy groceries. It buys mental space. It buys the ability to think. And the ability to think leads to better decisions, which lead to higher income, which leads to more mental space, which leads to a virtuous cycle instead of a vicious one. The same logic applies to forgiven debts. When a small debt is eliminated, the person no longer has to monitor it, worry about it, or juggle it. That freed attention can be redirected toward productive activity. The return on that freed attention is often far larger than the interest rate on the debt. The scarcity trap also operates at the level of time, not just money. People who are time poor, such as single parents working multiple jobs, experience the same tunneling effects. They focus on getting through today's tasks and have no bandwidth left for long-term planning, exercise, healthy cooking, or sleep. That time scarcity makes them less effective at work, more likely to get sick, and more likely to make errors that cost even more time. The solution, again, is to build slack into the system. A few hours of childcare, a paid day off, a delivered meal, these can free up enough time to break the tunnel and restore cognitive capacity. The productivity gains from that small slack often exceed the cost of providing it. This is not charity. It is efficiency. But our economic systems rarely account for the cognitive costs of scarcity, so they rarely invest in slack, and the trap persists. The implications for financial advice are profound. Most personal finance content tells people in scarcity to budget better, to cut expenses, to work harder. That advice is not wrong, but it is incomplete and often counterproductive. For someone already tunneling on scarcity, adding more tasks to their mental load, tracking every penny, feeling guilty about every coffee may worsen their bandwidth problem without improving their financial outcomes. The better advice is to focus first on building a small buffer, even if that means temporarily ignoring detailed budgeting. The second step is to automate as much as possible bill payments, savings transfers, loan payments so that fewer decisions require active attention. The third step is to reduce the number of financial accounts and decisions, to simplify, because each account is a cognitive tax. The fourth step is to accept that willpower is a limited resource and to design the environment so that good choices are automatic and bad choices require effort. These steps are not about being financially sophisticated. They are about being realistic about how the human brain works under scarcity. Let us return to the two people from the opening of this script. One has a buffer. One does not. The one without a buffer experiences every financial decision as a crisis. They pay late fees, high interest rates, and premium prices for small packages. They miss opportunities because they cannot afford the upfront cost or the time away from work. They make errors at work because their mind is elsewhere. They feel shame and anxiety, which further impairs judgment. Over a year, these costs add up to thousands of dollars, far more than the size of the buffer that would have prevented them. The person with the buffer, by contrast, pays no late fees, no high interest, no premium for small packages. They take advantage of opportunities because they have the cash flow and the mental space. Their decisions are not perfect, but they are consistently better, and better decisions compound over time. The difference between these two lives is not a difference in intelligence, effort, or character. It is a difference in the presence or absence of slack. And slack, once established, tends to preserve itself because it protects the cognitive capacity needed to maintain it. The calm closing thought is this: the scarcity trap is not a moral failing. It is a mechanical property of how the human mind responds to shortage. When you have too little, your brain focuses on that too little, and the focus itself makes it harder to escape. The way out is not to try harder, to budget more carefully, or to feel more shame. The way out is to build slack, even a small amount, and to protect that slack with automation and simplification. If you are currently in scarcity, your most important financial goal is not to become rich. It is to cross the threshold where unexpected expenses no longer trigger a tunnel response. That threshold may be lower than you think, and once you cross it, you will notice something strange. The decisions that used to feel impossible will start to feel merely difficult. The opportunities that used to be invisible will start to appear. And the trap that held you will loosen its grip, not because you got smarter, but because you finally gave your brain the breathing room it needed to think.